Welcome to Inside IT Automation, a ScriptRunner production.
Welcome everyone to our September conversation with Microsoft MVP Damian Scoles. Thanks a lot for taking the time. It's cool to have you here on our show. And I think for people who don't know you, I think you're 11-time MVP. Is that
12 years now? Yeah,
12 years now.
Yeah,
awesome. Okay, yeah. Awesome. And I think you're based in Chicago, right? The Chicago area.
Yep. Right outside Chicago. Yep.
Okay, cool. And you also wrote a couple of books, right? PowerShell books.
Yeah, I've got 5 PowerShell books and a couple of side books I'm working on as well. Yeah.
Okay. So I think this would be also something we can cover in this conversation, how this process looks like creating a book. This could be interesting.
Okay.
I think. All right. So a little bit from your backstory. So when did you start working in IT? What were the systems you were working with back then?
So when I first started out, I actually started out in sales. I was not in IT. So when I was at that sales job, I learned a lot about computers and computer repairs because I was at a computer repair shop. And so the guys that were there were always showing me how components worked and how they fit and this and then. I knew some stuff, but they really knew how to make things work. So, and then went from there into system administration, which took a little bit of finessing to get from point A to point B. But when I did that, we started working with, NT351, NT40, Windows, I think it was 311 at the time. And then eventually that obviously goes into Windows 95 and things like that. But I was a system admin, which back then, there was no PowerShell, right? You had batch files, you had Visual Script or Visual Basic, and then you had the GUI, right? That was really about it for administration. So for me, it was just, it was a fun job. I learned a lot, and then I got my MCSE, and then from there, the rest is history. But my background right now is Active Directory Exchange. That's really where the core, I think, of what I did for IT was. And PowerShell didn't come around until Exchange 2007. And so when that came out, we're like, oh, that's interesting. Microsoft's very much a GUI kind of company, graphical user interface. And now they have this command line thing. Well, that looks great, but is it useful, right? We didn't know if it was going to be useful at the time. It was, what was the code? Code name was Monad or something. That was just, anyway. But it did become useful because it allowed us to do things that we couldn't do right from the GUI. So I learned it. A bunch of my friends learned it, and we just went with it. And 17 years later, it's a tool that's now built into almost every Microsoft product that's out there. Whether it's the cloud or on-prem, you have a PowerShell interface somewhere. Now, it doesn't do everything, right? But it does provide a great tool for administrators.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you just mentioned Exchange 2007, but I guess you started working with Exchange almost earlier. Is it 5.5 already? Or?
Exchange 5.5, but I did a migration from Exchange 4.0 to 5.5. So I've seen 4.0, 4.5, and then everything from 5.5 to the present. So so it's a long time.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's like Exchange 5.5 was my entry to Exchange. This is, and also 2007 Exchange, of course, was my entrance to PowerShell.
Right.
Which I have to say I didn't really get it at the beginning. Why a command line interface? But I found some use cases pretty quickly where I thought, wow, that's a cool thing. That's really helpful. Yep. And now that you mentioned Monad, so were you already aware of this thing when it still was called Monad?
It was on the periphery, so it wasn't fully in focus at that point in time. But I knew it was coming. I just didn't know what they were going to do with it and what the actual intent was. Because, like I said, we were so GUI based with all the Windows Server products. It was just it looked like a fad or just a hey, Microsoft is trying to be Unix kind of thing. But as it snowballed, obviously, it's turned into a great tool. So it's just it's fun to look back at those days and realize that was the beginning. Yeah.
And what was the let's say the main use cases when you said, oh, okay, this is cool. I can use PowerShell for this particular use cases, and it saves me a lot of time. Is there anything that comes to mind from that days?
I would say a lot of things. So at first it was smaller things because at that point in time I wasn't managing a larger environment, but I was able to do certain things. Like there's some things you just can't do in the GUI that you have to do in PowerShell. There's the kind of that juxtaposition there. But for me, use cases is anything that I have to either do like a large query or a change or it could be for anything. It could be Active Directory, it could be Exchange, it could be now Graph and things like that. But use case scenarios, I'll give you one that I'm doing right now. This has nothing to do with 17 years ago, but it could sort of fit in because this still existed even back then with Exchange 2007. I've got a customer I'm working right now. They're doing a migration from Exchange on-prem to online, and they've got a bunch of shared mailboxes that people have set up all these rules on. And they're kind of worried that there are a lot of forwarding rules, right? They're not sure if it's going to a competitor or this or that or whatever. So we're digging into those rules, and PowerShell is able to do that. You can't do that in the GUI, right? You can't. I mean, you don't want to go to everybody's Outlook and look at the inbox rules because if someone has 80 inbox rules, that times 80 mailboxes, that takes a long time to analyze. So with PowerShell, we can now reduce that to a much shortened amount of time, and then create a report and hand it off to an IT manager or to the CIO or whoever it is, right? Saying this is what we found, you're in good shape, or maybe you're not in good shape, depending. But a lot of stuff that I do is analysis, right? It's a client or someone needs to do something, and I come with PowerShell, and I've got some pre-made scripts for Active Directory and for Exchange that I run right now that will run through everything, create all these export files, if you will, and then I can look at them. Sometimes they're HTML files I can hand off to get into the management of the company I'm working with, or it's just for me to look at it and go, oh, that looks good or bad or whatever it is. So yeah, use case for me is usually something that is reporting for sure, but sometimes even large changes. If I need to change one setting on, say 1,000 mailboxes or 2,000 mailboxes, whatever it is, PowerShell can let you do that because it's either that or you go click, 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 which I'm not doing anymore. So PowerShell is a time saver for sure in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. There's an interesting area, I think, this analysis part. So and the reports. So just of course out of curiosity. So you're creating the data, and do you have a specific additional tool to visualize it, or is it creating a CSV file and then you do everything, let's say, in Excel or something like this?
All the above. I have some code that'll put things to CSV files because I need them for analysis. I don't necessarily need them for any kind of like visual reporting or anything. If I need visual reporting, I've got HTML for that. So I've got some scripts that'll basically take whatever the data is from the CSV or from the variable or whatever, and it'll put into an HTML file. Sometimes, depending on what I'm doing, if it's not a report I need to give to someone, I might even do a pop-up on the screen, like an outgrid, where it shows like the columns and the data, so I can just look at it visually and make sure I'm actually getting the data that I want, for one thing. And then, what else? And sometimes it's just raw text files. Depending on what it is, especially like transcripts. So when you're running like your PowerShell script, you can dump all the stuff that's happening on the screen to a transcript file. And then sometimes I look at that transcript file later to see, did something go wrong, or maybe some extra data show up on the screen, who knows. And especially when you're troubleshooting scripts, having something to look at later can be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And so from the version perspective, are you PowerShell 7 or PowerShell 5.1?
As much as possible, PowerShell 7. It's generally more reliable that I found than 5. It's just sometimes you have to switch back depending on the module you're using. Like Exchange, we can use 7. There's some older ones that just won't work. I know that's going to be either phased out with newer versions of these modules, or just basically 5.1 will eventually just have to go away. But and then I'll use 5.1 when I go. So the funnier ones is when I do these analysis reports, I'll get on an older server and I'll have a script that's coded in PowerShell 7. And then you run it on 5 and you're like, that's not working. Or if you get an even older version, because I haven't run into anything recently, but the oldest Exchange I run into recently is Exchange 2010. But I have run into a couple of 07s, and sometimes PowerShell doesn't work as well, as it does now, because it's not 5.0, it's not 7.0. There's certain intricacies that just don't work, right? There's certain formatting to either the commandlets, or tabbing doesn't work, or control space when you're trying to find all the options on your PowerShell commandlet, things like that. Some things just don't work on the older version. So yeah, I'm using 7 because I like it. It's much better for sure.
Yeah. So let's say, okay, so the older version only comes into the picture if, let's say, also maybe the clients require it, maybe sometimes, where they say, okay.
I haven't had a client require it. The only time I run into is if it's on the actual operating system or for the Exchange version that I'm working on. If it's there, then I'll make do and work around it, and I can see the bugs and go, yeah, okay, I remember that's not going to work, and then I had to tweak something to make it work, and I'm on my way. But I've never had a requirement for 5, so I try to use 7 as much as possible, even at sites like that.
Okay, and so I have to ask this a question, of course. Is there anything AI related that helps you in your work with PowerShell or other things, or
not yet? I'm not entirely convinced at this point in time that it's ready. Because I've seen a lot of examples when you're doing code and you're trying to get help from ChatGPT or whatever AI you're using, and you get some creative results, is what I would say, from the returns. Now I imagine that's going to change. I'm not going to say I would never use AI. I'm sure there'll be a time where that will start coming in when I need to start generating code. Like take a sample that I have now and let's move this forward to maybe a different version or something else. Yeah, I imagine that I'll end up using that, but right now I'm not as much. I have so many other code samples and I do enough work that I'm comfortable not using an assistant. Now, if you're new to this, maybe AI will be able to help out. Just be cautioned that sometimes you might get funny results. So test it in the lab before you run in production. Yeah,
good advice for sure. So, and I also think I'm pretty sure that the things that you do with PowerShell and your use cases are, I guess, pretty complex. And my experience with ChatGPT and also with Claude, which I started to use recently, where I even see some better results, but still, if it gets more complex, then the question becomes, is this really helping me to get where I want to do? But as you said, and this is another maybe interesting topic, like if someone starts out using PowerShell, that could be maybe helpful, but also I think it could be dangerous, because just relying on and prompting something and getting something back, do copy and paste, that might not work as expected.
Yeah, like you said, that's similar to what people do now. They Google for some sort of solution, right? And then there's a blog that has a set of code. They go, oh, great, that'll work for what I want to do. And they copy, paste, and run. Well, that doesn't always translate well, because there might be, different variable, different domain, different, security, it could be just about anything. I think find the code and using AI is a good place to start, but take what you learn, do it in a lab, and make sure that everything matches up, so that when you go forward in production, you don't have to worry about any issues or anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but talking about maybe people starting with PowerShell, are there any other advice you would give to people who are thinking about using PowerShell, or maybe just started to use PowerShell?
A couple of things. One is build your own lab, whether that means getting an Azure VM or getting a Microsoft 365, basic subscription with one license. Start off with something so you have access to PowerShell there. You can also do a lot of PowerShell on your laptop, even if you don't have a connection in it. You can do a lot of stuff, learn the basics, like how variables work, how functions work, how to query things even on your laptop or your desktop or whatever you're using. You can do a lot of that there. I think there's some code simulators out there on the net as well, but there's also a lot of books and a lot of websites that talk about how to learn basic PowerShell, and those are a good base to start. Like, I'm trying to remember the gentleman who has that PowerShell and 30 lunches or something like that. That's a good book to start with for sure.
In a month of lunches,
something like that. Exactly. Yep. That's the one.
Yeah. Or maybe they could even go and look for your books and your blog, and maybe.
If you're starting out, mine are probably not the best place to start for some of that stuff. But if you need to start out and say, let's say you want to start in Exchange, or if you're doing Defender and Purview and stuff like that, that my books are more geared toward people that are looking for that subset. I do have a basic field book on PowerShell, But I think the lunch is a good place to start, and then you go to my book, and then you move on to other books, just because it's like a stepping stone, right? You've got to get the base kind of PowerShell knowledge that's out there. There's a lot of great books that kind of go through, how would you say it? All the, what they used to call it, not syntax, but all the rules and regulations, or whatever you're going to call it, for PowerShell, so that that if I come to this data set or this data type or this variable or whatever, I'll know how to break that stuff down, because I am not a programmer by any means at all, and I'm still learning things and still trying to remember half the stuff that I've learned over the years. Because when I come to things, sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, I need to do X, right? Because this property has sub-properties, or even sub-properties from that. So sometimes I have to keep on breaking things down until I find the data that I want. So it's just remembering that that data type is something. So learning all these data types helps you, with your foundation for building scripts and using PowerShell in your environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like what you just said. As you said, okay, you don't see yourself as a developer, which is exactly, I think, where for me it's exactly the same, because I'm coming from an IT admin background. So, but having PowerShell as a technology to, even without being a developer, getting the job done to automate stuff, I think is, for me, one of the greatest things. So I don't have to dive into becoming a C# developer or something like this to solve a real life problem, right? So that's really something I really like about it.
And that's something I run into almost every time I go to see a new client or customer, and we talk about how you can work in your environment, and PowerShell almost always comes up. There are very few people that I've run into that are extremely comfortable, like they're a programmer and they can, dive right in, learn the language and make their scripts and do whatever they have to do. Most of them are, like you said, IT admins that are just trying to get tasks done, and having PowerShell or learning it will obviously help them, but it's getting over that learning curve, right? Getting that hump so that they can get to that point where it's easy. I can name one admin that I've dealt with, and I haven't talked to him in a few years, but his motto was, if I can do it with PowerShell, I'm going to do it with PowerShell. So he was definitely a programmer in the sense that he did everything. Whether it was deploy a driver to a computer, install an operating system, patching, configuration, whatever it was, he did pretty much everything in PowerShell. I mean, that was his day. It was PowerShell. So that's the rare breed right now when it comes to IT admins. IT admins, again, they're looking to get stuff done. PowerShell's there, but it's not always like the first tool, and that would be nice if we could get them to do that. Yeah,
absolutely. So to let the people know, this is a pragmatic way of solving real life problems pretty quickly. If you start, if you give it the chance to look at it and getting some quick results. I think that's the main thing. So people say, oh, okay, I don't have to write, 50 lines of PowerShell to do to solve some specific problem, and then that typically, ideally, that would spark and say, oh, okay, if I can do this, then I could do that, and now I know how PowerShell basics work, so I can move on to anything, right? That's the nice thing about PowerShell now also being open source, so you're not really just looking at the Microsoft Windows stack. It can be something else as well, like Linux, right?
Yep. And I've even had the opportunity to convert some like VB scripts into PowerShell as well to do different functions. And I'm trying to remember the last one I did, but I know that if you're using VB script, you can also do most of that stuff also in PowerShell. So there really isn't a reason to take the old stuff. You start converting it to the new PowerShell so that you can actually get stuff done more efficiently, and more people will understand it. Because I've looked at VB script, again, not a programmer. I don't know half the time what I'm looking at. I'm just trying to go, okay, it's trying to do this small thing. Okay, I can do that in PowerShell. So and generally the PowerShell code is also smaller too.
So I was saying maybe it's just 2 lines of code compared to
sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So one thing I actually really wanted to talk to you about is to change gear a little bit is Microsoft Graph, because it's it's out there for a while, and Microsoft tries to push this, and I'm not really sure if they're technically successful right now, because I hear so many people complaining about it, and I would be interested in, let's say, if because we see areas where sooner or later Microsoft Graph will be the technology to manage Office 365 or Azure. So what is your take on Graph, and again, what should people do, maybe what they should not do? So where from your perspective, where is it really already capable, or maybe sometimes even mandatory to use it, and where you would say this is some areas where, okay, maybe there might be better solutions out there, at least at the moment?
Yeah, so from my experience, if you're not a programmer, again, my background, it's an even steeper learning curve than just learning PowerShell itself, because with like Exchange and Azure AD and things like that, you've got RBAC roles that kind of control what you have access to. You can see like a subset of commandlets right in the module that you're in, things like that. So you kind of get pigeonholed depending on your role. Whereas Graph, when you log to it first time you connect to it, it's like everything's there. I mean, it's visible, but it's not necessarily usable, right? So in some ways, it's a bit complex. I mean, I had this discussion with a couple of engineers that use a lot of PowerShell, and they're heavy into PowerShell, and they're like, Graph is a mess. It's not that it's not useful. It's the way it's structured right now. It makes it hard for someone to transition from a traditional PowerShell method for, Microsoft 365 workloads to something that's serviced by Graph, because you've got to know what roles and permissions to assign, and they can be very granular, right? You can go down to, say, just a read write or a write write, whatever it is, for a particular part of what's in the cloud. So it's not like an entire role set up where you've got like a block of things already prepared for you. So it's a bit complex for that. But if you can get over that part, then once you're in, the problem I have right now is I'm a very big get help guy, because if I'm new to something and I'm trying to learn something, and if I don't have a book that tells me how to do it, I'm either going to look at Microsoft's like learn documents or get help. Well, get help for Graph right now is not very helpful. There's not a lot of detail in there. And I'll give you a use case that I'm working on right now. I'm working on a book for attack simulation training, which is in the Defender portal. And there's PowerShell that's in Graph specifically for that. So I can grant myself the roles so I can see that. I can see all the commandlets. But when I'm trying to run certain commands, I get stuck on something. So then I go look at help. And sometimes the help files are very detailed, and sometimes they're blank. So it's very hard to get my steps done. So I'm trying to get from point A to point B, and I'm getting like halfway and then getting stuck. With a little bit of help online, you can find GitHub, right? You can use that, and you can put a bug report in or ask for help there. And sometimes you'll get help. And actually did get one corrected recently. I'm trying to create an entire attack simulation with PowerShell, and we get jammed up on, I think it was like the training options that were in there. And so with a little bit of work, the Microsoft engineers like, hey, try this. And then if you look at his code versus ours, the difference was like literally the formatting error. It needed parentheses and quotes around a particular chunk of the data. So if you didn't know about that, your script was going to fail, or your one-liner was going to fail all the time. So, but when it comes to Graph, the overall picture is, yes, we're all going to be probably transitioning there, right, to use it. There are definitely some good aspects and bad aspects to that. Right now, Exchange is not fully translatable to Graph. They don't have all the stuff. There's no real full EWS replacement at this point. And then a lot of your backend configuration just isn't present in Graph. But what I have found is that you can actually dig into a user's mailbox much easier with Graph PowerShell. There's a lot of nuanced commandlets, if you will, that allow me to get into their mailbox and pick out a particular email or counter item or something that's in there. So there's definitely some use there, some use case scenarios that are there. I actually used it for another project where we're trying to migrate a client from one tenant to another, and they were using a third-party tool to do that. And for whatever reason, it didn't copy the group memberships correctly between the two tenants, or at least for the two teams, one each tenant. And so we used PowerShell through Graph to query all the teams, pull all the members, put that into a spreadsheet, right? Go to the other tenant and then re-import them so that they would actually be assigned to the correct teams using PowerShell. So there are some good use case scenarios where they work. And then things that we're being forced to or being channeled, I guess would be a better way of putting it, would be like, think about your MSOL and your Azure AD, commandlets that are now deprecated, right? And you have to do user management in Graph. There's a lot of good stuff in there for that. I mean, we do licenses, we can change people's properties, photos, things like that within the Graph PowerShell module. So there is some good stuff there, but it's still a bit convoluted. I don't think everything is perfect at this point in time. Let's put it that way. You definitely can't do some workloads in Graph. You can do others, right? There are some good things in Graph, but I can't say it's 100% fully baked. I mean, I just can't say that.
Yeah. I think this is what I see and hear also from other people, and especially I think people who are coming from this PowerShell background as we know it, they are getting kind of frustrated if they see like, okay, there's no help because everything is auto-generated and then documentation is missing, and that's I think a point where people get frustrated and kind of think, oh, okay, this is not a way I know, or this is not how I know PowerShell, because typically Get Help is typically very good. You see all the information that you need, but now it's more like, okay, I need to be kind of the explorer to find out, and if I don't have the time, coming back to this IT guy who has the goal to solve a problem, then it kind of collides in a way, right? Because it doesn't fit to this quick solution paradigm, if you will. But,
and I do understand some of the reasoning behind it, because I think the granular permissions are there because Microsoft is trying to keep like the least privilege set up for PowerShell. The problem is, like you said, it's the coming from a background where I've got a role that has this many assigned rights, and then you go to Graph and you have nothing, and then you have to figure out how to build that same particular set that doesn't exist, right? So if Microsoft could create maybe like an exchange, whatever, right? But in the Graph side, and it would have the directory, whatever we need, on the Graph side. If it had all that set up, I think that would make things easier, or at least it would certainly get us over the first hump, and then at least allow us to explore Graph some more, for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, so what you're saying is, so let's say for the use cases where you have old modules that are deprecated, like MSOL, you would say Graph is definitely a good way. But is it? But as you also said, but it's not something that you can 100% say, okay, now I can do everything with Graph, right? You still have to see what your use case is, if it's possible with Graph, right?
Right, and Microsoft actually has a document out there for anybody that's transitioning from that Azure AD and the MSOL modules into Graph. There's a document out there that kind of gives a one-to-one. So if you're using a certain commandlet, they give you what the Graph commandlet equivalent is. It's actually fairly useful. At least it gets you over the hump. At least it gets you to the right direction. It may not be a perfect reference, because nothing is ever going to be perfect, because like a lot of the parameters that are on certain commandlets in MSOL do not exactly translate to what's in Graph. So you may have to kind of find the right commandlet to make whatever you're trying to do work, but it is possible for sure. So that is, and I think there's enough stuff for user management that you could do that within Graph. I don't think that's a problem. I don't have any heavy uses in that yet. Most of my work is, even though I do a lot of identity, I don't do a lot of configuration yet with that, because a lot of stuff is synced from on-prem. So users have already had their settings, in AD. So if I need to make changes, I'm going to make changes in AD, and then those changes go up into Graph, and Graph is happy. So I don't have a lot of use cases for that yet, but yeah, there's other workloads you can. I mean, SharePoint, it's not there. Exchange isn't there. Other ones are. There's one that does like OneDrive. I don't think that one's in there yet either, because that's part of SharePoint. Teams, there's some team stuff. There's that. I don't think it's not 100% compatible yet, but there definitely is a lot more Teams commandlets in Graph than there are like Exchange ones. I can tell you that for sure. Yeah.
And so I think are there even some tools out there that you can use to find out what commandlet would be the right one for your current script?
So you can use, one tool that I started using recently, and it may not be exactly what you're referring to, but I use Graph Explorer. So Graph Explorer, I can sort of poke around and see, like if I'm trying to get to a certain part of Graph, I can see what the recommended code could be, and then like what the I'm trying to remember the back end point is, but the actual access link for a Graph. So if you're not using a like Git ng team command, right? So like straight Teams commandlet, but if you're invoking REST or whatever, they give you the URLs for invoking the REST commandlets as well in the Graph Explorer.
Okay. I think I was thinking about this use case of, okay, I have my MSOL AD stuff, Azure AD stuff, and I want to switch it. And I thought I saw some.
There might be a tool out there, but I don't. It's been a while.
Yeah, and it's always because Graph is a moving target. You never know if the tool that was working yesterday is still working today.
Yeah, I think there is a tool. I think you're right. It's either a script or something that kind of gives you like recommendations for like if you're using this one, replace it with this or something like that. I think there is something. Yeah.
Yeah. So I will definitely. I think we have it somewhere, and I will put it into the links of this video once it's on YouTube, so people can check it out. Because I think right now everyone is desperately looking for support when it comes to how to use MS Graph. This is really like, and so is there? Okay, so are there any scenarios where you would definitely say, okay, you better not go for Microsoft Graph at this point? Or where you had some bad experience with it? Or?
Well, let's see. So there are some things that I'm still working through. I'll give you an example. I'm trying to remember which it's in privacy management. I think it's the subject data, or what they call it now, subject rights request is what they call it now, the article that I wrote. So there's some stuff in there that works, and sometimes it doesn't seem to work. It's because it's like the commandlets I have for the attack simulation part. Graph is very granular when it comes to commandlets. Like if you had like one commandlet, let's say in Exchange, Graph might have 4 or 2 or 3, right? Because the one commandlet doesn't do everything that the one commandlet in Exchange Online would do. So like I said, so some of these commandlets are very much broken down. Like I said, they're very compartmentalized. Like they even have commandlets that do counts. They do like counts of how many simulations you've done in attack simulation training. But like subject data requests, there's certain things that are like, oh, you can insert a note or you can do this, that, or whatever. And the code does not work perfect. So although I'd love to use PowerShell for that and try and, automate some stuff. So if someone had like a, a compliance process or something, they could click a button, it would do whatever, or stuff like that. You're going to have to do that in the compliance or purview portal now for, modifying a subject data or subject rights request. You just can't do it in PowerShell. There's certain things that just don't work. Exchange management, you can't do in Graph. SharePoint, like I said, you can't do in Graph. Teams, you can do a little bit. Still, a lot of it still works in the old, Microsoft Teams module. I think it's still being updated. But there are things that, like I said, I can go into Graph now, look at users. I can pull certain data. I can look at like the team memberships. That's one thing I found useful, is because I don't want to go to the GUI and go, okay, they've got 500 teams. I need to know the membership for each one, and then the owner for each one, and then are they private or public, or what's the settings they have for each of these groups? Whereas in PowerShell, I can go, okay, here's a report, hand it off to the next person, and go to my next task, right? So I'm not wasting a lot of time trying to pull that data manually. I hate doing screenshots. If I can avoid it, I'll avoid it. PowerShell is the way I go for anything I can grab report-wise. So yeah, that's a scenario that I like is. And I'll tell you, if you have obviously in larger environments, it makes things much, much easier because you have thousands and tens of thousands of objects to worry about. But even smaller environments, 10, 20 people, it still can save some time. Again, not having to click 20 times, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just run one script and you're done.
Yeah. And you have a consistent process, right?
No human error.
Yeah. Hopefully. Yeah. Absolutely. So, okay. So what I'm hearing is that there's definitely some good use cases for Microsoft Graph. There are some areas where Microsoft has to improve, and I guess on the highest point on your wish list probably would be to get a better documentation, right?
I want some good examples, right? So how do I run this commandlet? And it will do what again, a lot of documentation that's out there on the Learn site, it kind of explains what it does, but then there's no examples. So it's very hard to make that translation, right? To can I run the commandlet with this switch, and what do I have to put after the switch if it's not documented? So
So okay, well, I'm pretty sure Microsoft gets a lot of this kind of feedback because whenever I talk to people, I hear that. I went to the PowerShell conference Europe in Antwerp just a couple of weeks ago, and of course it was a topic because everyone is like, okay, and maybe now they're trying to at least solving some issues when it comes to Azure or Entra ID with the new module. That at least in this particular area looks like that can be a help, but I think it's still in preview. So
yeah, it's still in preview, and I still need to download it, get to working with it, but I haven't had a chance recently. But that's on my list. And
it's we will find out how useful it is and when it will be actually GA'd. So. So I think I really wanted to talk to you about this Graph stuff because I know you are doing a lot of with Graph, and so that's really cool. Is there anything else you are working on, or some plans when it comes to PowerShell that you want to talk about? I know you have a newsletter where you always also talk about PowerShell stuff, obviously. Then there's your blog, so there will be the links in the description. And where else can people find you?
I'm on Twitter, but not very often.
Okay, but LinkedIn, I guess, right?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn for sure. Yep, I'm on there. Obviously my websites, but that's really about it. I'm not a huge social media guy, so I thought about doing YouTube videos with fellow MVP Dave Stork, and ended up creating a few, and I have his videos up there, but it was on installing Exchange 2019. We're like, okay, we'll start doing more videos and this and that, and then it never really translated to anything else because neither one of us really has the time. With me doing is, work, I have 3 kids at home. Well, they're not all at home now, but I have 3 kids, and working on books and stuff like that. I literally just haven't had time to kind of do videos, but I'd love to do that, but it's probably not going to happen. The thing I really want to work on now, it's kind of on my wish list, kind of like thing you put off to the side, is we're talking about documentation for commandlets. And I've had this idea in my head of creating a third-party site for basically taking commandlets that don't have help now and putting like a bit of sort of what Microsoft has now, like the parameters and everything like that, and then trying to put some code samples underneath there, like, hey, you can do this, and these are the options that work, and things like that. Things that aren't necessarily documented per se, right, by Microsoft, and maybe they're missing examples. That's what I want to put in there. But that's kind of like the pie in the sky. Well, that's an American expression, probably, but that's my wish list thing. Is I want to try and create a site to help people try and learn commandlets, and especially if they're missing help. If I can figure it out and get a usable, workable example, I'd like to do that. But I also want to leave it open so that if other people had ideas or, they could post maybe comments or something on there so they could get their own examples so that we could kind of make a repository of examples. That's again, it's an idea.
Yeah, but this sounds like a perfect community-driven approach to help everyone with, for example, struggling with not finding examples of documentation. Great.
Yeah, I just need to reprioritize my time to get to it, basically.
It's okay. It's just 24 hours, right? So what so what to do? Yes. And did you say that you're working on a new book as well now? Or
so I've got another book in the works. It's in review right now. It's on the attack simulation training that Microsoft has. My goal is, because I help Michael Van Hornbeck with his security book that he has for Microsoft 365, and the attack simulation training is like a subsection of that. So it's going to be a entire book written on just that product.
All right.
Kind of giving people like a detail, like how do you run a simulation? How do I create my own payloads? How do I do an automation? How do I do all this stuff? And right now it's about 300 pages. It's a lot of detail. There's a lot of it's like a chunk of it dedicated to PowerShell, and that one is still a bit incomplete just because the PowerShell, again, we talk about Graph, is not perfect. And I've just gotten a few things just worked out recently, so I put that in there. But yeah, that book's in review right now. I don't know when it'll be published because I'm waiting for Michael to get back to me since he's reviewing it right now. So hopefully it'll be the next month.
Okay.
But it'll be just like any of the other books that I do right now. I'm going to update it like maybe every month or every 2 months or every quarter. Depends on what our schedule is for all the other books that I'm working on right now. But yeah, that'll be out soon.
All right. Okay. Interesting. So there's a lot of things we can look forward to in the future from you. That's great.
Yep.
So yeah. With this, I would say thanks a lot, Damian. This was a great conversation. I think a lot of interesting insights around different topics, especially MS Graph. So again, thanks a lot for taking the time. And yeah, see you next time.
All right. Thanks for having me. All right. Bye.